Okay, cool. I'll bring it. I got my Diet Coke to keep the energy going. Hopefully I can keep it going here. Well, yeah, UX design is really something I have high energy about, so that's good. All right, cool. Let's get started. We have an hour. That's good. So again, the reason I covered this topic is because when I first started my career and into it, I realized UX design is really important. I could write the best PRDs or MRDs or whatever, but we could totally fall down on UX design. So, and not every one of my featured teams had a UX designer. Who here has like all the ample design resources they need and want? Right? So good PMs fill vacuums. They fill critical voids, right? And so this might be one that you may have to fill. Maybe not right now, but in a startup in the future or some other group or something, right? So at a minimum, it's good to know so you can more effectively partner with your design partners. But also, you may have to do some of this stuff. And I'll just kind of cut to the chase. I'm a big fan of PMs learning how to wireframe and being comfortable wireframing. I don't expect you to create the world's best wireframes, but a wireframe can be a very powerful artifact. Real quick, for those of you that, I'll be brief here, but don't know about my background, just so you know where I'm coming from. I started out with a technical background. I was lucky my parents gave me a computer when I was 10, so I learned how to code back then. I was a double E major. And then my first job out of college was actually doing submarine design for the Navy, so very high-tech stuff. After I did 5 years there, I knew I wanted to go to business school, so I applied, and I was lucky to get into Stanford Business School, so I moved out to the Bay Area to do that a while ago. And when I was in business school, that's when I heard about this awesome job called product management. I said, that sounds like exactly what I want to do, but I've never done it, so where's the best place to learn? And everybody told me Intuit was the best place to learn. And I had a great time working there, and I did learn a lot about product management there. So probably about 75% of what's in my book is based on stuff from Intuit back in the day. And then after Intuit, I was a product leader at a few startups. I had, like a lot of people here in the Valley, an itch to do my own startup. I did my own startup. I was CEO and co-founder of. We launched a TechCrunch, and I did that for a while. And then what I do now is product consulting. I help startups and companies in product management. I've been doing that for 9 years now. I'm also a big believer in sharing best practices. So 4 years ago, I started a monthly speaker series meetup in Mountain View at Intuit called Lean Product Lean UX, where I bring in the top PM UX speakers. You can find me on Twitter at Dan Olsen. If you want to win a book, that's how you win a book. Tweet, and then I put all my slides, including these, that are already up there on danolsen.com, dan-olsen.com, along with some videos. So, since it's the end of the day, it's the last session, and you guys voted for this, I'm going to share one of the most closely guarded product management secrets with you guys. And it's the product manager's motto. Does anyone know Spiderman's motto?
Great
power comes great responsibility. So the PM model is similar, it's just a little different, which is with great responsibility comes no power. We're all laughing on the outside, but we're crying a little on the inside, right? It'd be nice if we had a little more power, right? But anyway, so yeah. There's a little humor to end the day on. So yeah, and we're responsible for a lot of things. Like I just got done saying, your job definition may vary, or what you need to do depends on who's around you and what teams you have and what resources you have, right? So we're responsible for a lot of things, and one of the things we're responsible for is product market fit, and also making sure the product ends up with UX design. Even if a lot of things we're responsible for, even though we don't report, right? It's our job to hit the launch date, even though we're not the one coding it, right? We got to manage the dev team, get their estimates in place, project manage the efforts. UX design is not that different. We're not going to be the ones designing it, but our job is to orchestrate the efforts of the UX designers so that we end up with a good UX design. So that's why I wrote the book, The Lean Product Playbook. It's just it's 335 pages. It's like much of what I have to say about how to do product management, including UX design. And in fact, UX design is so important that I have a whole chapter on UX design. You can obviously get books on nothing but UX design, but I put what I think the critical principles are in there, and I'm going to cover those in this talk today. I'm going to give, since we have a big group, I'll give 2 copies away to this group. This is the biggest group. Each tweet is like a chance to win. If there's a slide that you like, feel free to take a photo of it. This is the hashtag. If you want to throw some hashtags for product management on there, you can do that too. So why is this talk UX design RB1? What is UX design? So UX is short for user experience, and it's funny because recently it's taken a very specific meaning. If you talk about UX designer or UI designer, now that suddenly the two different flavors of designer part. It used to be visual designer and interaction designer, but now it just kind of gets to UX. But bottom line is, it's defining the product in a way that, designing it that meets customer needs, that's better than the other alternatives, and that delivers a great user experience, right? And so my other talks from today, especially my morning talk, was about this, right? So I'm not going to get into that too much because I covered that. Today is going to really focus on assuming you know what needs you want to solve and how it's going to be better, how you deliver a great user experience. So sometimes, these terms, UX versus UI, which is for user interface, get used interchangeably. In general, people would say UX is broader, like user interface is the interface, the details of the interface that the user, and UX could be broader. Sometimes I see people use it totally broad, like anything the user can do is UX. If they call your contact call center, that's part of the UX too. You can get a little too broad with it sometimes. There's actually another term called CX, customer experience. If you want to include the call center on that term, that's fine with me. But UX, that's what UX is. And why Army of One? Because basically the reality is to deliver a great user experience takes a variety of skills, which usually don't all reside in one person. And the reality is you're often missing skills on your product team from these you'll see I'll talk about the 4 critical skills in a sec. And like I said, good product people fill the gap. So being self-reliant and being able to fill in certain things as an Army of One is helpful. Now, as product managers, we mainly live in the world of product ideas, and they're mainly documented with words, right? Who writes Jira tickets, right? Those are words, right? And we write PRDs or MRDs, or we write product briefs, we write all these things, right? They're in words, right? At some point, you can't launch words to the customer, right? At some point, you have to get from words to a coded product or built product, right? That's where UX design is the gap that translates the words into what the final experience is, right? And the reality is there's that gap actually exists on many product teams. And so a simple way to talk about this gap is, define would be whose job, who's basically defining, figuring out who we're building this for and what needs it's supposed to meet and how it's going to be better, right? This is product's role, design's role, and then code is developing role, right? Obviously, nothing happens if we don't have engineering, right? So there's a lot of companies in the Valley that have this model. All engineers, no PMs, no designers. There's plenty of these, right? I'm sure a lot of deep learning AI startups look exactly like this, right? So not surprisingly, these products don't end up usually having a good user experience. But again, without engineers, you're not coding anything. And this is kind of like a design maturity model, like organizational maturity model. The next level up is, okay, we don't have anyone who's designing, but now we have an engineer. In addition to the engineer, we have a product manager. So at least someone's thinking about customers and thinking about how to meet their needs. But we still have got a design gap. So these products tend to be better than these products, but the UX still usually suffers. You may have a situation where the PM can kind of fill the gap partially because they've picked up some UX designer stuff. They can wireframe, right? They're comfortable interviewing users, whatever it is. They can partially fill the gap. Or maybe it's a talented front-end developer who's picked up the same kind of UX skills and is really good in Sketch and things like that, right? So the gap may not be as big depending on the team. And maybe between the two of them, they can cover it all. In fact, in the old days of Intuit, this is how they got by. They didn't have designers. They just had very customer-centric PMs and engineers who thought a lot about the design. And even though back then it wasn't like there were a lot of designers you could even hire, that's how they got by, right? But the best is when you have all 3 staffed and all 3 are working together in concert. So this is a very common diagram you see. It's like a Venn diagram with the 3 key roles. You call it the triad or the trio, like product management, UX design, and engineering, right? So that's kind of the highest level. Yeah?
So you notice the overlap between UX and product managers. And when I had a couple interactions there where both people felt they were voice of the customer,
oh, totally.
The product, these are my people I'm talking to, you don't get to come to it.
Yeah, I actually gave a talk, it's so funny, back in 2003, one of my designer friends invited me to give a talk about like that, who owns what kind of thing. And so I gave a talk on that. And it's true, ideally both should be customer-centric, both should be talking to customers, right? I think you can get clear, and I'll answer it right now, you can get clear on who should be driving what. But one thing I will say is whenever, and it's not just with designers, it can be with developers, whenever I see one function saying, hey, you're crossing my line, no, you stay on that side of the fence, it's just a bad symptom, it's just a bad symptom. If people are worried about the turf wars like that, it's just bad, right? So anyway, just it's an aside. And I've been in situations where devs, or designers say, here's the line, you can't cross it, I own this, my toys, I'm gonna go home, and like that kind of thing. That's just bad. To answer your question, what do they really own is different. Who was in my morning talk about? So I talked about problem space and solution space. The bottom line is PM should be the experts in the problem space. You should be the expert in who the customer is and what are their needs and how are those needs getting met by other products today and how are we going to meet those needs in a way that's better. So product strategy, value prop, needs, benefits, you should be the expert on that. That's the problem space. The solution space is okay, great. Say we want to build a better mousetrap or a better whatever, easier way to share photos with your friends. You're not a designer. The designer's job is to say, hey, given that we want to make an easier way to share photos with your friends, they are the person who can explore all the different ways that we could do that from a UI standpoint. Does that make sense? So they both are valuable and they should work. Obviously, they need to be connected. If they go off and are decoupled from what you're trying to solve, the problem you're trying to solve, it won't work. But conversely, if a PM has to come up with, they're going to probably do one wireframe and it's not going to be that great. Whereas a designer can really, if they engage with you and they understand the problem space, they can say, oh, what about this, and explore different directions. So in my mind, the PMs are responsible for exploring and defining the problem space, and the designers are responsible for exploring and defining the solution space from a UX standpoint. And then obviously the devs do the solution space from a coding standpoint. So anyway, but the second one made me think about it is, hey, you can't come to this session. That's baloney, right? That's just like saying, oh, you're crossing this line. Everybody should be able to go to every session. All right. So the mental model that I like to use for UX design is an iceberg. And the reason why is, you guys probably know an iceberg, there's a little bit that sticks above the surface, but there's a lot more that you can't see below the water that's not obvious, right? The part that sticks above the surface in this analogy for visual design, for UX design, is visual design. That's what most people see and react to. We take in most of our information through our eyes. You guys are looking at the shapes and fonts and size of my things right now, right? You're looking at me, my gestures. Maybe you're listening to my voice, 10%, 90% visual, 10% audio when we're listening. But most of it comes in visually, right? But when you use a product that's intuitive to use, it's because the team behind it has done a good job thinking about and executing these more foundational layers. Conceptual design it's probably best by example, and I should have put the slide in, but I didn't have an Uber example, where basically it's what's the fundamental concept for how we're designing it. So the Uber app, I remember when I first saw it, it wasn't that it was map centric, right? And in fact, if I took the screenshot, I showed it to you and I took it away, it's not about the pixels. The conceptual design of Uber would be like, okay, you can imagine just talking about it and saying, okay, let's show the user where they are in a map, and then let's show the cars nearby and show how far away they are and show them moving in real time. That's the conceptual design of Uber. The pixels that bring it to life are all the way to visual design. The next layer up is information architecture. If it's intuitive to find things and navigate around and labels make sense, they've done a good job. If conversely you can't seem to find things and you're getting lost in the app, they've done a poor job. It's how you organize and structure the information or functionality. Interaction design is anything that the user can interact with your product. Click, tap, right? Forms, controls, buttons, navigation, all that. So this is how I like to think about it. And the whole point of building up, it's kind of like being colorblind. If you're UX blind, you only see the visual design, right? The number of times I've had a mock-up that I've taken to a key stakeholder, an executive, and the first thing that they do is they go, and it's for a new product, right? Some new functionality we're trying. It's a big deal. It's a big new project, new functionality. And the first thing they say is, oh, I don't like this red. The shade of red you picked? No, I don't like it. At that stage in the project, the first set of mock-ups, should we be arguing about the red? We shouldn't. We should be focusing on, hey, is the conceptual design right? Have we organized things well? Did we get the right set of features in there? Or the way we're talking about it right? But some people, they just cannot. It's just how you're wired. You're wired to take in visual information. So part of learning UX design is learning to decompose these layers and say, I may not like the color red, but I'm going to ignore that and just look at how things are laid out and see if I like the way that they're laid out, right? That's what it's all about, yeah.
It's like when someone is buying a house and they don't like the carpet, so they don't buy the house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the thing that really made it click for me is a while back I saw this diagram, arguably a little busy, but I'm a geek, so I loved it. I'm like, this is awesome. So this is from Jesse James Garrett. He's the guy that invented the term AJAX. So he's a talented designer from Adaptive Path, one of the top design agencies. This PDF is free at his website, jjg.net. But what I love is he's like decomposing the different, and it's called the elements of user experience. He's decomposing what are all the different elements, right? So this is an even more blown out version than my iceberg. My iceberg has 4 layers. He's got, and it's going from like more abstract to more concrete. So he's got what are the user needs, what are the site objectives, functional specs, content requirements, interaction design, information architecture, information design, interface design. I mean, he's probably got too many, but it was great for me to see someone tease it apart. I'm like, okay, cool. And in his book called Elements of User Experience, he has 4 or 5 layers, and he gives them each, it's just one layer, and he gives them a name. But anyway, it's a way to think about, and there's some overlap obviously, but it's a way to like, how do we decompose, right? If we were to design a car, we wouldn't start out by saying, what color? Should it be cherry red, or should it be burgundy, or what should it be? We would start out by saying, well, what does it need to do? How many people does it need to hold, right? What's the use of this? Is this a sport vehicle? Is this for transport, like for like carrying a family? What is it? How big does the volume inside need to be? What kind of fuel does it need? What kind of torque? What kind of acceleration? That's what we would argue, right? So that's the idea, is to start out with the high level stuff and then work your way down to the other stuff. So what you can do, what I like, is I flip this on its head sideways. In a way, you can view this as the workflow that our product team needs to go through, ideally, right? Some people just jump straight to visual design. Some people, and there's some things missing here, so I would add some more things to the workflow. Before we get to that stuff, we should probably start out with some PM-ish like stuff. Business case, market analysis, product strategy, product roadmap, right? And then what we're missing on this end is coding, obviously. Right? But that's like the workflow. If you think about it as a factory, and trust me, obviously some people just jump and start coding. Some people just jump and start designing and then coding. But in an ideal world, you'd have decent answers or guesses for these things in this order, right? And if we say, great, well, if that's the workflow, what role is responsible for which portion of it, right? I think the product manager was responsible for the things at the left. What are the user needs? What's the functional specification? That's kind of stuff, right? The requirements. That's where the PM should be driving things. Yeah.
What's the difference between functional
You
specification
know,
and
it's
content?
yeah. That's why it gets too sliced and diced for me. Just right. It's like just call it the requirements layer, product requirements layer. Say, right. These layers, where we're talking about information architecture, interaction design, navigation design, that would be what would used to be called, I think is a better term, interaction designer. And these days, the euphemism is a UX designer, which is just kind of fuzzy. And anyway, so I won't get into it, but that's what they call it. And then this would be a visual designer, which is these days they call it a UI designer. It's still very confusing between UI and UX. And anyway, these are very different skill sets, right? A visual designer, and you can tell, like when I work with companies, I mean, if their website looks horrible, then they have neither of these. I know they have neither of these. If their website looks pretty good, but it's really hard to use, that means what? They have a visual designer, right? And normally I'll interview the CEO like, I'm like, what's your design situation? Oh, we have a designer. Oh, they're good, yeah, they're good. And I look at it, and then I go and I look at their background. It's like, yeah, they mastered in graphic design, and they never did HCI or this kind of stuff. So you need both. It's not an either or. These, they're easier to use, but they don't necessarily look pretty. Or someone did the wireframing and the sitemap and things like that, but it just doesn't look good. So, and then obviously, whatever UI developer, front-end developer you have, you could have these amazing mock-ups in Sketch, but if this team doesn't have the skills to implement it, then it falls down there. So you need all 4 of these. These are the 4 critical roles to have a good user experience, right? And if you look at the companies and the product teams that create great products, they have these roles. And when I thought about a 4-person team that the world respects, like who came to mind? The A-team, of course. These guys get it done. And now we just have to figure out who's what role. So this face is obviously, he's the pretty boy, so that's a visual designer there, right? Right? Who's doing all the heavy lifting and all the work? The developer, BA Baracus. Right? Who's kind of the architect of things, of the plans and things like this? UX, that guy, right? UX. And then, PMs love it when a plan comes together. So a plan comes together. So that's, anyway, just a... you need those 4 roles basically, right? And again, who has all 4 of those roles like adequately staffed on their team today? All right, go work at his company, her company. That's good. There you go. Yeah, good. All right. So again, just to recap, the elements and go into a little more is there's information architecture, right? That's the structure and layout at both. If we're talking about a web product or a mobile product, it's both at the overall site or product app level and at the page or screen level, right? That applies at both of those. how it's structured, right? And the artifact here is a sitemap. I'll show you examples of that, where you're just at the high level saying, okay, there's 10 screens. Here's how they're organized, right? And so many companies don't do that. They start building screens, and it doesn't make sense. They're not organized, right? Site layout and page layout as well. Interaction design is like user flows, how you navigate across multiple pages or screens, and user input, controls, and form design. And then finally, visual design, how it looks versus what it is. It's often also called Chrome, so it's fonts, colors, graphical elements, right? So for information architecture, the documents that are used here, a sitemap, even though we're doing apps these days, still called a sitemap, and it just shows you the section of the website and what the major navigation patterns are. Wireframes, right? They show you the layout, and I'll show you some examples in a sec. But wireframes are typically done in grayscale or black and white, specifically because of the iceberg, so that that executive can't jump in and say, I don't like the red. If it's grayscale, we can't argue about the color. If I don't put images in, you can't tell me you don't like the photo. If I don't pick a font, you can't tell me you don't like the font, right? So you just strip that out so that people just cannot engage at that visual level, and they have to engage at the lower levels. And then the tools here for, basically the older tools that people would use, Visio, OmniGraffle, PowerPoint, Whiteboard. I mean, Whiteboard's great to start out with. Visio and OmniGraffle, those are like the older tools. These days, there's a lot more specialized and better prototyping tools. So like Balsamiq, who uses Balsamiq here? You guys like it? Yeah. It's a great tool. I love that tool. And it's like the price point's lower. It's easy to use. Axure is another one that's more powerful that you can use. So anyway, so Visio and OmniGraffle are good for sitemaps. If you just need like the boxes and lines, that's a good thing to do it in. But as far as wireframes goes, if you haven't checked out the latest wireframing tools, I would check it out. Here's an example of a sitemap. Not the world's best sitemap, but an example where you're showing the different sections and how you can navigate around. They've got some kind of symbology here between the rectangles and these curvy things, which means something. And there's 3 different symbols. It means something, right? So there's another way to convey additional, like maybe this is a modal page, maybe this is a third-party page. This means there can be n pages deep. I don't know, but the bottom line is if someone's not doing this for your product, it's probably not going to be well organized. Here's another example. This one's color-coded, right? So the colors mean like different sections or things like that, right? So it's just, again, it's not rocket science, but if someone's not thinking about it, especially as you grow over time and you add on new things over time. As an example of a wireframe, again, not saying it's a great wireframe, but I just grabbed it off the internet. Here's a wireframe. Can you argue about the red? You can't argue about the red. There's no graphics, right? So it's just kind of showing, it's actually a pretty busy wireframe, but it's like showing you what the heading, what's going to be where, rough size, rough location, right? Approximate location and size. It doesn't even have to be this good. It could be like this, a napkin. I'm a big fan of, sketching stuff. It could be something like this, just to convey what you're thinking about. And I think a lot of people, PMs are like, well, you know what, I'm not an artist, I'm not good at drawing. I'm not good at drawing, but just there's value in just sketching and getting your thoughts out there. So I'd encourage people to sketch. Now, when you're doing layout, there are some concepts. One of the most important concepts is visual hierarchy. And this has to do with basically how people scan and read the content on your page, right? So this is I like to do these brain hacks if you're in my other section, right? So here's these 4 circles. If you had to say like, what's the most important circle, what would you guys say?
The bigger one.
Blue one, right? What would be the second most important circle?
Green.
Great. What's the third most important circle? Oh, what's the fourth most important circle? All right, interesting. So I almost always get this one is first. Did anybody think red, this one was second? Some people think this is second. Yeah. Usually these 2 compete for second, and this one's last, but these guys picked up. But here's what's going on. Your brain is wired to process things in a certain way, and there are signals subtly being interpreted as to what is important. Here's the decoding of it. Position. The things that are at the top are more important than things that are lower on the page. So that's why the blue, it was top, right? We read left to right, so things on the left are more important than things on the right. In right to left languages, it's different, but that's basically it. Size. If something's bigger, it subtly tells your brain it's more important than things that are smaller. And finally, color and contrast, right? Things that pop and have a high contrast are more important. So if we go back here, the blue's got top, left, and biggest. It's got 3 out of the 4. It's not the color that pops the most. The red probably pops the most. But there's 3 out of 4 is enough for your brain to say, yeah, that's probably the most important one. This one, it's the second biggest. It's at the top. It's right, not left. And the color doesn't pop a whole lot, so it's 2 out of 4. This one, it's not the top, but it's left instead of right, and the color pops, but it's not big. So that's why some people split. It's like 2 out of 4. And then this one is not top, it's bottom. It's bottom and it's right. Problem is it's bigger. If this was smaller in size than that one, then everyone would university. Anyway, that's what's going on with your brain, right? So why does that matter? Well, it matters because you want to, like, if you do it poorly, then people are not going to be able to grok and follow what's going on your page. Conversely, if you take advantage of it, you can get people, you can basically design where their eyes are going to go. And there are eye tracking studies. This is an eye tracking study of a landing page. So what they're showing here is a heat map. There's a baby over here, right, and they're selling some diapers. There's a heat map. Red means where people are looking the most, going down to yellow and green. Where's the first place you look on this landing page? The baby's face, right. Why? Top, left, big, and it kind of pops on the background. The other thing I didn't mention is people like looking at people. We're all trained to look at people like, are you going to fight me or eat me or what, are you my friend or what's going to happen, right? And we were very trained to look beyond that at faces as well, people's faces, right? We can tell subtle. So anyway, they did that on purpose. They did not randomly put the baby's face in the upper left, right? They did that right on purpose to grab your eyeballs. Then where does your eye go? To the headline. It goes left to right. Top, left, biggest letter, right? And then you go down, 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 then you get to the buy button. They did that on purpose. Yeah?
Yeah, but aren't we naturally keyed in to notice faces first as well? I mean, in this instance, it
Yeah, that's
isn't
what I said.
top
So
left, but
above
right.
it's both. It's top, left, it's big, and then beyond that it's person, you see people, and then beyond that within people, faces. Yeah, definitely. So they took advantage of all those things. There's no way your brain's not looking at the baby first when it's like 5 out of 5 things, right? Yeah, but they designed it this way, right? This text got smaller and they made you move. They designed it that way, basically, right? That's an example of good visual hierarchy where they use the principles to get you to read the information in the order that they wanted and get you to the conversion button the way they wanted. Here's another eye tracking. This is from a Google search results page. And again, red is the hottest, and then orange and yellow, green, blue. And you can see there's a big drop off in color right here. Like it starts to drop off. What's going on there? It's the fold. Okay, well, if you haven't heard of the fold, it actually comes from the old newspaper days when newspapers were folded, right? And so when it was going to be stacked up on the book stand, they're trying to sell newspapers, they had to decide what's going to be above the fold, like visible when you walk by, and what's going to be on the bottom half of that first page that's below the fold. And they put the most important stuff that would get you to buy that paper above the fold. So this is on a computer. The fold means where does the content end on the browser given the screen height. The sad thing is, unlike a newspaper, we all have different size screens. So there's not one fold. It's a distribution, right? So you can see, hey, at this point we lost a bunch of people. So it's gotten tough. And that's why we have responsive design these days. But anyway, that's what's going on there. And just to show you the example, one thing I can tell you, people love to have this debate of do you use your scroll or not? Right? Some people are like, they don't scroll. I scroll. My grandpa scrolls. We're scrollers. Like, people scroll. People don't scroll. They have these. I'm sure you've never had a debate with a developer on something like that, right? Yeah. And it gets dogmatic. And the reality is not do you scroll or not. It's like what percentage of people scroll or what percentage of time do they scroll. If you're reading a long blog post, you're probably going to scroll. If it's something else, you may not, right? But the bottom line is whether people scroll or not, I can guarantee you that putting critical call to action buttons above the fold versus below the fold will make a huge difference in your conversion rate. So that's why you want to be mindful of that. It's just to make sure. The other thing that can happen is there's not like a million different fold points. There are certain computers that people use and certain monitor sizes, so some are more common than others. If you happen to do your design in a way where imagine it ended, like it ended here, you might not even realize there's stuff below it. Sometimes the breakpoint happens just the wrong way where people don't know to scroll down. That's why on a lot of sites you see the little arrow that gives people a visual hint that there's more down below. Because what happens is actually a trade-off. The visual designers say, I'm going to do responsive CSS, so no matter what their size of their screen is, it's going to look picture perfect. That's great, but then you don't know if you can scroll down or not. So it's like this trade-off between visual design and usability. Yeah?
In the old days, before scroll bars were hidden, now a lot of times they're hidden, but
Yeah.
there was a visual cue that there was something below it. but now they're like automatic.
Visual
and-
design. See, the visual people said, those are ugly. Let's get those out of the way.
I know.
Untidy. It's untidy to see those things. Yeah, but use usability. So you have a trade-off between visual design and usability.
Well, I know, they served a purpose, and for people that knew it was a visual cue.
Sure,
and-
I agree.
And now it's
Yeah,
gone,
yeah,
more or less.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm just curious, how did you get the heat maps?
Oh, good question. It's eye tracking studies. So they actually have this device that it sits on your computer, and while you interact with it, it can locate the pupils of your eyes and maps it based on the angles and stuff like that. Yeah.
And there's companies that you can
Mhm.
contract out to do it.
Yeah.
But
There's
there's
all-
an app you can use? or
Well,
it's
so
hardware?
this is like with a hardware device. This is a little older, but these days it's getting to the point where almost like one of my clients actually did some eye tracking with the webcam that's built into this, but it wasn't the angular precision isn't as good as these high-end ones. It's just like it was more like, are you looking left or right? We had two images to look at. Are you looking left or right? But there's also an equivalent for clicking. It's called the Heatmap. Like there's a lot of analytical tools these days that let you see where people are clicking in click density instead of gaze density. Yeah. All right. So another important thing, so basically it's just how your visual system is wired. We talked about visual hierarchy. There's a couple other principles, a set of principles called Gestalt principles, and it's important to know when you're designing things because you can use them to your advantage, or if you're unaware of them, you can use them and do it the wrong way, and people infer the wrong thing. So one of them is figure and ground. So some people look at this and they see a vase, and some people look at this and they see two faces, right? That's the difference between figure and ground. This doesn't come up a whole lot, but sometimes it does come up. What's much more relevant is proximity, right? Your brain perceives these as three columns, even though it's just a bunch of dots, because they're next to each other. So things that are next to each other, your brain assumes are related to each other. So you can use this, if you put the tooltip for a button or a control next to it, then it works with your brain and people go, oh, that's the tooltip for this. If the label for a button is in the wrong place or too far away, then your brain, it doesn't make sense and you're like, you don't get that, right? So you want to use proximity to put similar things, locate them together. The other one is similarity, right? Your brain perceives this as rows of black and white, but it's not, it's just a bunch of dots. Why? Your brain perceives that things that look similar, have the same visual look and feel, as being similar, right? If I have a website, and I've got say I have a Shutterfly site, and I've got, you can order photos on 20 different pages, and on some pages the buttons are blue, and on some pages they're green, and on some pages they say order, and on places they say buy. It's confusing, right? So if I put all the buy buttons the same color with the same, same look and feel, then people will get it, right? So that's the idea, is things that are similar to behave similarly or related to each other should be given visual treatment similarly. And then finally, another one is just closure. Like your brain perceives a closed shape, but it's not really closed. So anyway, similarity and proximity are the ones that you really want to be most mindful of when you do it. The next thing is when you lay out, and consistency in general is really important. One of the other aspects of consistency is how you lay it out. And if you were just to go to say you had like 20 things to lay out on a home page, and you just randomly laid them out, it could be distracting and not easy to use. So one thing that people do is what's called a grid. They will pick a set of pixels and they'll pick a width of column, and then the idea is everything has to live on these grid lines. So you can't randomly have this text is over here and this one's over here. You can as long as they're on the grid lines, right? That's the idea. And typically it's very common to have a 12-column grid, and this actually comes from the old world of print, but people have adapted it to the web and it helps a lot. Like if on the page content was starting at all these different horizontal locations, it would be hard to read and follow, right? The cool thing when you have 12 is you can say, all right, I'm going to have 6 blocks like that, or I'm going to have 4 blocks like that, or 3 blocks like that. So it gives you flexibility. It's not super limiting, but you make sure everything lives on the edges. Here's an example of how you would wireframe with the grid. Things wouldn't randomly start and stop at different widths. They would live on, does that make sense? You live on the grid, and then that really helps with your eye's ability to just process the information and not have a bunch of different stuff there. So it's just a best practice of doing that. These days, Bootstrap, a lot of these CSS frameworks have this built in, so it's really easy to do that. All right, so that's information architecture and layout. Next one is interaction design.
Is there a similar rule on the vertical axis?
That's a great, I was just thinking that there's not really, you don't want to have, same thing, you don't want to have a bunch of random stuff. So people just tend to have sections. Like they don't worry about the gradations being proportional, but they just make sure there's sections, right? If you really want to get anal about it, there's like the golden ratio, and some designers like to do that in their websites, but the bottom line is everyone's monitor size. You have the big Thunderbolt monitor all the way down to the Apple Watch, so it's just not gonna be hard to have a golden ratio and all those. But yeah, so usually you just don't want to have too many arbitrary gradations. Again, yeah, it's a great question. Great question. So interaction design, the main charts things used here are it's getting less and less is flowcharts. So in the old days, you would do a flowchart in Visio or OmniGraffle of like, here's the screens and here's what we're gonna go, and then you would create wireframes for the screens. If you have a complex multi-step process, it's still valuable, I think, to do a flowchart. It can't hurt. But these days what happens is people just, with wireframes or mockups, they make them clickable now or tappable. So you see the flow. Instead of them being static wireframes, now you see the flow. But again, if you have some complicated business process with multiple conditionals and branches, it might be good to flowchart it. Flowcharting tools, Visio and OmniGraffle are great. Sometimes people do it in PowerPoint too. For wireframes, we covered these. Balsamic and Axure mentioned. There are some that are optimized for mobile. Mobile is very big these days, so Flinto and Marvel are optimized for mobile. There's also some really simple, easy ones to use. Pop. Has anyone played with Pop? So Pop, you draw like a sketch on a paper, you take a picture with your phone, and then then basically you say, okay, if they tap that, then you go to the next one, basically go to the next one. So you can just have like a way to just take sketches and not have any digital creation tools and do that. So it's interesting. It's low fidelity, but it's quick and dirty, it's good. And DAP is another one similar like that. At some point you may want to go beyond clickable wireframes or mockups and build a prototype. So that really means, what a prototype means is, hey, we're actually coding something, but it's like throwaway code just to work through the interaction design. We're not actually going to use this code. So sometimes people build HTML, Bootstrap, jQuery, prototypes. Sometimes people do Ruby on Rails. Yeah.
I just wanted to say sometimes there's value in making paper prototypes if you're trying to do proof of concept or just do some quick testing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll talk about the range of things. I agree in general. I think that my take is sketching is good for the team, but it's so easy with Balsamic. It's so easy to go to the next level and have something a little bit more. But anyway, yeah, here you. And then it's baked in. But yeah, I wouldn't be averse to showing people stuff in sketching either. Here's an example of a flowchart. So that just means someone's thinking through, hey, what if the user does this? What happens if they do this? What if they do that? That's what interaction design means. Thinking through what happens if the user does different choices and what do we do, right? Again, you're on Napkin. I love the Napkin sketches. So again, I love sketches. I love how they had to jump over because it was like they didn't plan ahead and all that jazz. And again, I encourage everybody to sketch. If you're like, hey, I'm not good at drawing or whatever, it doesn't, it can just be a simple sketch. One thing that's popular, especially for mobile, is what I call a combo wireframe flowchart, where you've got these wireframes and then people show, hey, if you click here, they have arrows connecting them. And because the mobile screens are small enough, you can kind of get multiple pages on a screen. Visual design, the documents here are mockups. Sometimes they're called comps. The tools that are used are typically Photoshop, Illustrator, Sketch, like the high-end, like the stuff that the designers use. Some PMs use it. It's funny, I interview lots of PMs, and I always go, hey, do you wireframe? And I hope they say yes. And then if they say yes, then I go, what tools do you use? And I expect them to say, like, Balsamic. Every once in a while, increasingly, I'll get people say, I do it in Sketch. I'm like, wow, okay. And you can do it. It's fine. The bottom line is whatever tool gives you productivity is great. But Sketch is meant for high fidelity. It's designed for high fidelity. You can obviously do low fidelity. But like Balsamic, you can only, it's meant for low fidelity. They don't let you go high fidelity, basically, right? So it's interesting. But anyway, those are powerful tools. And then, they basically do the design in there, and then they export them as images, right? They usually export them as PNGs or JPEGs or GIFs, basically. And sometimes really savvy front-end designers will give you HTML or CSS, and they give it all to you. Just to illustrate the difference between a mock-up, wireframe, and a mock-up, this is a wireframe, right? Grayscale, no colors to argue about, no logos or images to argue about, no fonts, right? And this is out of Balsamic. It's an iOS app. And then here's the higher fidelity mockup for the same app, just to tease apart those layers, right? You see how we just ignored the visual design layer completely over there. We're dealing with layout, what's on the page, how big is it, where's its relative position. Here's a high fidelity mockup of the same app. Now we do have colors and fonts and pictures and stuff, right? But from a definition standpoint, it hasn't changed really. Sometimes these are not as popular these days, but because usually the tools nowadays, in Sketch, it can directly export these attributes to the front-end developer, but sometimes you'll see people that like call out all the different specs for it. One part of visual design is color theory. And color theory, it may seem intimidating. You're like, wow, what's that? But it's really not. So I just want to spend a little time on color theory. Let's just do a quick quiz here. So you know about the primary colors, right? Who thinks the primary colors are red, yellow, blue? Who thinks the primary colors are red, green, blue? Right, so when we were in kindergarten with paints, weren't they red, yellow, blue? And then all of a sudden we're in tech world and it's RGB, right? The bottom line is you can have either set, right? It's just primary colors. I mean, you start with 3 colors and then you start mixing them basically, right? And it depends if they're like subtractive or additive and how the paint and like a screen is different than paint. I'm not getting all the details, but the bottom line is there are multiple primary color systems. Red, yellow, blue from the kindergarten coloring days. You add them all up and you get black. On a screen, it works differently. You put RGB together and you get white, basically. And then there's a print one, CMYK, that has 4, right? So it has magenta, cyan, yellow, and black. So you can have multiple primary colors. For our world on the screens, it's RGB, but that's just it. But the bottom line is you take your primary colors, all it is you take your primary colors and you mix them together and you get your secondary colors. And then you mix them together and you get your tertiary colors. And you keep mixing and mixing, and you end up with a color wheel. That's basically how we get all the colors from the primary colors. Now in our world, colors are specified as RGB values. And this is where some people, their eyes glaze over, they go, oh, like the designer's saying this needs to be, C6, F1, A5, and the color's wrong. And they're talking about colors with this, like, these letters and numbers. I just want to demystify that. It's basically in hexadecimal, which is base 16. So we count in base 10, decimal. Instead of going 1 to 10, we run out of numbers, right? It goes to 16, so we run out of numbers. So all they do is they use A through F for 10 through 15, right? So when somebody says it's basically 10 in hexadecimal, that's 16, right? 116 plus 0. FF, that just means, hey, there's 15 of each. That's 255. So these numbers go from 0 to FF. 0 to 255 in decimal. That's it. And all you're doing is for each color saying, oh, how much red is there? Is there 0 red? Or is there FF red, 100% red? It's just a scale from 0 to 255, saying how much red is there, how much green is there, how much blue is there. That's all it is. Let's put this to work here. So if I had 0 red and 0 green and 0 blue, what color would I have in RGB?
Black.
I'd have black, right. So that's it, 0, 0, 0, 0, right? That's how you work it. If I had 100% red and 0 green and 0 blue, what color would that be?
Red.
That's red. Yeah. And if I had all 3 colors to the max,
White.
that's white, right? All right, last one. What if I had all max red and max green and no blue? All right, so that's all. That's all it is. Just the biggest part is just decoding it. But if you think about it, it's just 0 to FF, going from 0 to 100%, like how much red, how much green, how much blue. That's all it really is. Once you pick a hue or a color, then you can form tints and shades and tones. This is used to kind of have a palette, color palette that's got some variability but still hangs together and is consistent. So tint means you're adding white to the hue, shade means you're adding black to a hue, and tones mean you're adding gray to a hue. That's basically it's like just and it's a way to just like take a couple of hues and then just mix it up. So again, a good visual design, somebody is thinking about what's the set of colors that we're going to use. It's not just, hey, we're adding another page. Hey, Dave, the developer, what color do you think the heading should be? Oh, I think I'll make this button purple. It's like, and you just kind of randomly add stuff. It's like, no, you're not trying to box people in, but consistency is very important. So you're just saying, hey, let's have a palette. Let's have plenty of choices, but this is what we do. There's our core colors, accent colors. Here's an error color. Just like what is it that we use, and that's part of it. It's an essential part. Another essential part of visual design is fonts. And the world of web fonts has exploded, which is great. Back in the day, 4 of the common fonts were these guys, right?
Oh man.
Some of the stuff here to know about fonts, one way of categorizing them is serif versus so sans serif. So serifs are these funny little things at the ends. Those are serifs. And so sans serif just means without serifs, right? Just something to know about. And it used to be that, like, because the screen resolution wasn't so good, they would recommend using sans serifs on screen, and this would be more for print. But now these days the screens are good enough that you can use either one. Of these fonts, Courier is different than the other three. How is Courier different than the other three?
It's not proportional.
Yeah, it's monospace. So this is a subtle thing, right? But it's like proportional fonts, each letter can have a different width, so it looks nice and it's tight. Monospace, each letter is designed to have the same width. When people code, they code in monospace so that they can see things line up. And when you see code examples, it's just one of the examples. So a typical way to go about this is just to use two fonts. Most designs use two fonts. You can go nuts, but what they basically tend to do is we pick one for your body text and one for the headings. And they're different, and ideally they complement each other. And a common way to go is the body text is sans serif and the heading is serif because it's bigger, but you don't have to go that way. But that's the idea. And there's tons of fonts these days. So basically, yeah.
Just going to add on that subject, if you're going to have a lot of text, like a blog post, you want to use a serif font because it's faster to read it. Those serifs are the cues that help you read it faster. And that's why books and newspapers use serif fonts.
Yeah, and these days the resolution is good enough. So, but still, if I give you 8-point serif, it's not gonna. Yeah, so I have to. Part of it gets into the size and stuff like that. But I hear you. I agree. Yeah. And so we used to have limited choices because of browsers, but now we have CSS font face, and so now you can, it's a bazillion Google fonts, all these fonts you can use now. So now we have too many choices for fonts, but it's great. Some of the things you can control with CSS, right? The font family, that's the font that you get. The color, the size is important. The line height, that's like how much padding, or what's called leading actually. From the old days when they would print books, they put lead in between the lines. So it's leading, and if the leading is too smart, then it's all scrunched together vertically. It's too spacious. So it's like that. Font weight, that's the bold. Font style, italic. You can do text shadow now on CSS, all kinds of stuff you can do. All right, cool. So we talked about a lot of different tools. I'm curious, who uses Visio or OmniGraffle here? Okay. Who uses PowerPoint or Keynote to do their stuff? Yeah. So for UX design. Interesting thing there, in 2004 I was at a startup and I never had to do design because at Intuit I had designers, right? I kind of did some rough wireframes or something. But I had to spec out a lot of stuff at this startup where there's no one else but me and the founder and the developers. And so I went online, I did all this research, I downloaded some tools, none of them were good. I found a white paper that made the case as to why PowerPoint was the ideal medium prototyping tool. So you can definitely use those things. The problem is you have to create all the little widgets yourself. In Keynote, has anyone heard of Keynotopia or use that? So Keynotopia was popular. It has all the widgets and stencils, so you can just grab them and use them. But honestly, I would say for those, it's good for something really quick and dirty, but the wireframing tools have really come a long way. Who, Fireworks Sculpt, that's an older one. Photoshop, Illustrator, Fireworks Sketch, you guys in that? Couple guys, all right.
GIMP and Inkscape.
What's that?
GIMP and Inkscape. I don't have money for Adobe.
Okay, right. Balsamic, anyone on Axure? Yeah? Cool, so Axure, higher price point. You can do a lot of interactivity and stuff, so it's cool. If you want to do a higher fidelity, higher interactivity, then Balsamic. Cool thing about Balsamic, actually the next slide, it's going to come up in a sec. So any other tools that you guys use? Huh? Yes, I don't know why it's coming up in a minute, totally. So when your designer gives you all these amazing graphics from Sketch or Illustrator, you as a non-designer, non-technical person can upload them. Actually, it's a good segue to the next one, which is what are all the different artifacts that we can create? And I like to categorize them by, so deliverables, design deliverables or artifacts, by fidelity. So if this is the final live product, it's the highest fidelity. It's like how closely does it resemble the final live product? And then up here is interactivity. So if the live product is fully interactive, how much can I interact with it compared to the final product? In the bottom left corner, lowest interactivity, lowest fidelity, we have the awesome hand sketch, whether it's on paper or on a whiteboard. It's great. Can't click on it, can't tap on it, right? But it's good. This is good, good tool. In the old workflow, the next level up would be a static wireframe. And I use the word static explicitly because it wouldn't be clickable or tappable. You're just working through the wireframe. You might do it in OmniGraffle or Visio or something like that, right? But Balsamic has made it really easy. The cool thing about Balsamic is if you add a button, baked into it is like, hey, where do you want it to go when somebody clicks this button? And you can link it to another page of the wireframe. And the old workflow, some interaction designer would do the wireframes, and then they'd throw it to a visual designer who would do the mockups. That's the old workflow. That's kind of dead these days. What people are doing now is it's so easy to go straight to clickable wireframes or tappable wireframes that the static wireframes are just kind of gone now. Like I mentioned, Balsamic makes it easy. Marble, Flinto make it easy for mobile stuff. And so you can string together, a set of screens or pages. You can't handle every path, but you can handle what we call the happy path, where you expect people to go down, maybe even a couple side paths if you want. And then the next layer up these days is clickable or tappable mockups. This is where InVision comes in. Who uses InVision here? InVision is a great tool because you get these high fidelity mockups from the designer, and you can upload them to InVision, and you can say, okay, I'm going to draw a little hotspot rectangle around that button, and when they click that, they're going to go here and do here. So you can do like the same thing as Balsamic. It's just not baked into the controls. You have to draw the little rectangle hotspots, but it's really easy to do. And that's a great tool. In some cases, if you have a high degree of interaction, you may want to do an interactive prototype, like I was saying, throw away code to kind of really get at it. Axure can help live beyond this clickable, just simple click. Like you can have conditionality in there, but maybe you have to build some HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or Ruby on Rails kind of thing. And then finally, obviously, the highest fidelity, highest interactivity live product, right? So these are kind of the choices you have. There's a preferred workflow that I like, that I see work really well. Again, a way to think about it too is this is where the words live. This is where the PRD and Jira stories are. And it's like, how do we work our way to live product in a way that makes sense incrementally and de-risks things? So here's what I like. Start out with hand sketches. This is great for the team to iterate and go through divergent thinking and different approaches and how they might design it, right? Wireframing. At some point when they're happy, take it to clickable or tappable wireframes with those tools like Balsamic, or and then iterate. Once you're happy here, this is actually good enough to test with people. I wouldn't necessarily test here, but I test here, even though you don't have any design and things like that. Mainly because you'll see, like, one, does the information architecture make sense? Does the interaction design make sense? But also, is there any key functionality missing? If you take my advice and are really drastic on your MVP, then you won't have some features in there. This is where you test and see if they scream and yell that feature A was in there, or it's totally fine that it wasn't in there, right? So that'll come up here. And once you get to the point where you've worked through those issues, then you can proceed to clickable or tappable mockups. I love testing here. This is great. I use InVision here all the time. And the fidelity is high enough, and you can click through the paths and stuff. People really, at that point, it feels like a product to them. And then, this is where in my book I recommend testing waves of 5 to 8. Pattern matching what are the top complaints or issues, addressing them, rinsing and repeating until you get to the point where there's no more major complaints and people are starting to say, yeah, I could actually use this thing. Then you can proceed to doing a live product, right? But I recommend testing your live product because this doesn't have any database performance issues or browser compatibility issues or anything like that, right? Sometimes, not always, sometimes what you put in the dev pipe is not what you get out the back end. So, just check it on live product. But that's a good way to just go. That's one recommended approach I've seen work very well to kind of work through the design and de-risk it as you go along. I'm a big fan of Balsamic. There aren't that many tools that I plug, but it's super easy to learn and use. They have a widget library, so if you're still doing PowerPoint Keynote and creating things on your own, like all the widgets are there. They have annotation with sticky notes, which is cool if you need to explain things. You can do the quick navigation. The other cool thing, early on, the problem with Sketch or Photoshop, you need to have Sketch or Photoshop to look at the files unless somebody exports a certain way. Balsamic always supported export to PDF, and every computer has PDF on it, so you can send it to anybody. They can go through and click on it. And it's about, I think the price point's like $79. So anyway, I just highly recommend that. If you haven't used it, I would check it out. But wait, there's more stuff I didn't have time to cover. Understanding your prioritizing needs, value prop. User testing, so there's a whole bunch part of UX as well, as once we have these prototypes, how do we test them with users and do that? And so I have a lot of advice on that, and analytics I covered earlier, and all these are on my website. So all right, to sum up, identify, remember that product A team, you need all 4 skill sets basically to have a good UX, so identify if you have some gaps, figure out how you're going to fill them. I encourage people to sketch. When you wireframe and are doing your layout, remember the visual hierarchy, the Gestalt principles, and the interaction flow. And for the mockups, keep in mind the grid, the color palette, and the stuff that we covered on the fonts. I mentioned that I run a monthly meetup. Here's the URL, meetup.com/lean-product. I've been doing it for 4 years now. We have over 6,500 members. Our next event is Thursday 19th. It's going to be a much better talk on design than what I just gave you guys, because she actually, I didn't know her. I just saw her talk online. I thought it was so amazing that I invited her to come in. because she does a great example of starting out with a page that's poorly designed and then iteratively introducing a design principle, and then we apply it to tweak the design, and then we go through and we go through and we go through. It's going to reinforce a lot of stuff I said, but it's a very powerful example. She wrote a cool little book on Kickstarter called Hello Web Design. So anyway, it's free to join the group and get notified. Our events are $20. We have dinner. It's not pizza. We have like a nice dinner and a big group of people at Intuit headquarters. I also mentioned that I do consulting. In the last several months, I grew my team. So I kind of consult at the VP level. I've added people at the director and senior PM level. So anyway, if you or your company is interested and needs help, happy to chat with you guys. Brendan wanted me to mention that they want to get feedback on all the sessions. So if you could please go to this URL and provide feedback, I think that would be helpful for them. And then we still have a few minutes for questions here. I'll tweet out the book winners. Happy to connect on LinkedIn. These slides are available on my website. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any other questions. Yes?
You said you joined Intuit because at the time it was the best place to learn product management. What do you think is the best place to learn product management now?
Yes, I'm being recorded right now. All the places are great. I think Intuit is still a great place, to be honest with you. Now, in general, it's a function, if I decompose it, it's a function of company culture, right? How customer-centric is the company? How empowered is product management at the company? Those are the principles, right? And then I think the product team you're joining, are there people you can learn from? Probably most importantly your direct manager, but also your peers and more senior PMs that are there, right? So that's the criteria. Even within a company like Intuit, there will be variability from team to team and business unit to business unit. So even within if there's a general company that's good on the other dimensions, you kind of need to look at the specific team. And I think there are other companies where those opportunities exist too. I think Facebook, I hear a lot of PMs that are happy there. Again, it depends on what group you're in. LinkedIn, Google, you know. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so those are some companies that I would throw out. Yeah, I'm happy to chat more. I'm happy to record.
Where do you recommend looking for more advice, or are you working on a talk right now for customer experience?
That's a good question. I'm not working on a talk on that, but one of my former clients was Medallia. They're a leader in that. They provide software for that, so they have a lot of great thought leadership content and articles on their website, Medallia, Medallia. And there's other books on customer experience. I mean, increasingly people are becoming more aware of it. So yeah, I don't have a book that I can point to on it. There probably is a book on it, but it kind of goes beyond the stuff I usually work on. Yeah?
If I had to ask you, can you give me one website that I can look at that really embraces all the topics you have covered here, as well as the conversion, retention, aspects
Like that has the advice and information resources, or that they executed it well?
that their website really
Interesting.
is
Well, you know,
top-notch.
I was about to say I don't think I can have an answer, but there is one that comes to mind, Netflix. And I didn't mention this in my I should have mentioned my analytics talk. So they just pull up the Netflix, just go to netflix.com, you'll see. They're very, I should have it in here. Next time I gotta add it. I need to add Uber and Netflix. If you go to their homepage, let me pull it up while we're talking, but basically, you go to their homepage, they practice all the visual design hacks I just mentioned. The visual hierarchy, they have you looking exactly where they want you to look. I'll check it out here. Hopefully it'll pull it up. But basically, their ads are hilarious. There's a family sitting on the couch looking at the TV. They're also looking at the sign up button. And so you look where that, not only do you look at faces, but if someone's looking, you'll look where they're looking. So they totally design it. There's another one where there's a guy sitting at on a couch looking at his mobile phone. If you follow his gaze, like the button's right there. Nothing else on the page, like not 5 things you can click on, just one sign up button you can click on. Right? That's how they roll. And then they A/B test everything. So one is they do the qualitative, the Oprah, like I was talking about. Here you go. Here's Netflix. Let's pull it up. Look at that. All right. Maximize. All right. So this one, like look at that. There's only one button to click on. Like they don't cram a bunch of stuff. They have one big title, right? They have Netflix. They did it. Like they want you to click that button, right? Now this particular one, no one's really looking at the button, and they have a sign in, but it's all the way up here, right? So there's and this is probably mobile optimized. If I grab this, it's probably, right? Yeah, see, it looks even better on mobile, right? There's your button right before the fold on most phones. You're going to have that button right there, right? And if I Googled different Netflix, let me see if I can do it, Netflix landing pages or Netflix. And I go to images, and we'll see some of these. Yeah, see the family? The family looking at the thing, and then the dude, there's another family, they're just like this, anyway, they're really good at getting you to look and click and convert and all that jazz, so, yeah, they're good at it. Also just recently had someone from Amazon Music come and talk, so you're like, yeah, where are they looking? Hey, what are they looking at? They're looking at the button, hey, Hey, look at the button, right? So you're like, oh, let me just follow their gaze. Oh, what's this here, right? It's like once you realize the visual design stuff, you get it. Recently, my last meetup a few weeks ago, the director of product management for Amazon Music spoke. And so I think Amazon actually, if you think about Alexa and you think about Amazon Music and things, there are certain areas where they really are doing a lot of the things that I talked about. So, yeah. Sure. Yes.
So what are some of the principles you will recommend for judging a particular work in UX? Like somebody can say, okay, I like this design, but what are the ways to logically debate in that area?
It's the iceberg, right? And so you can basically say like, this is, how easy is it to find things you're looking for? How objectively, how well organized and structured is the information? That's what that's all about. That's basically it, right? So you could easily say, the way that would work is you could have an app that has like 5 sections. Say you have say it's like Kayak, where you can book a hotel, you can book a flight, whatever, right? And you just say to someone, hey, please try to book a flight. And you see if they can find the place to book a flight or not, right? That's the empirical way, right? So that's basically it, right? Interaction design, that's beyond just organization. That's like, okay, great, like, say you want to book a flight and you want to find one less than $500 and you want to, go from SFO to Dallas on March 13th and you want to have a direct flight. Try to do that in our product and see if you can do it, right? And you see, right? Old school usability would have a task, and they would say, what's the completion rate, a success rate? And it would be black and white. I would say we test with 10 people, only 4 of them could figure out how to do what I just said. Our task completion rate would be 40%. No one would be happy with a 40% task completion rate, right? That kind of stuff. As well as you can do subjective measures. Just ask people, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how easy to use is our product? And see. So there's behavioral, there's attitudinal, there's testing. There's a lot of different ways to triangulate on it. Right? Yeah. You can also look at, from my analytics chart, you can look at the flow with these tools. You can see how do people go from page to page. And you'll see that there'll be places where they dead end, right? Or where they bounce. That's typically smoke signals that there's something wrong with the UX there. Low conversion rates if you have a multi-step funnel, right? If you have a multi-step funnel process and all of a sudden there's one step where you're losing like a high percentage of people, bad UX is probably the culprit. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're good. All right, we have a little break before the comment session. Thanks a lot. I'll tweet out the book winners. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.